The legends of Memphis Wrestling return to Jackson, Saturday, September 21st at the Picture Perfect Event Center. It will be a night to remember, featuring the stars you watched every Saturday morning on TV. Be there for the Fan Fest meet and greet at 3:30 and the official Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame induction ceremony at 7 p.m. featuring Jerry the King Lawler, Superstar Bill Dundee, the Boogie Woogie Man, Handsome Jimmy Valiant, Dangerous Doug Gilbert, Wildfire Tommy Rich, the Rock and Roll Express, PG-13, Downtown Bruno, the Birdman Coco Beware, Dr. Tom Prichard, the Dirty White Boy Tony Anthony, Nightmare Danny Davis, Terry Golden, Sir Mo, the Spellbinder, Tony Falk, Carl Fergie, Jerry Calhoun, Michael St. John, and more. Plus a special reunion of the stars from TV5 Power Pro Wrestling and KAW. The legends of Memphis Wrestling return to Jackson, Saturday, September 21st at the Picture Perfect Event Center. Sponsored by Budweiser, Pro Shingle, Thomas Media, Slide and Ride Rodeo, and WBBJ TV. Tickets are on sale now. Go to Eventbrite and search Official Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert. I'm your host, Gene Jackson, and it's my pleasure right now to welcome the man you came to hear, the one and only Dangerous Doug Gilbert. Doug, how you doing, man?
Man, Gene, I'm doing great. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well. I've been getting good feedback all day from our first two episodes, and so here we are. We've already made it to number 3. Does it feel like we've been doing this for 3 weeks already?
Man, it sure don't, man. It seems like everything's went really quick, and but I've got some actual feedback from some people also, and they say we're talking about some good stuff, and I tell them they have to probably give you credit for that because me and you talk, and you kind of check up on everything and remember everything. I tell them all you got to do is say something to me about it, and I can give you about 100 stories about all of it. But I tell them you do a fantastic job of coming up with stuff for us to talk about.
Well, I appreciate it, man. I'm enjoying these, and like I tell people, man, it's a lot of fun, and I would sit here every week and talk to you about all this wrestling stuff, whether we're recording it or not, because I'm just a huge wrestling fan, and I'm fascinated by all the history and especially the history of the Gilbert family. Things that you're not one of these. There's certain guys that they've done 10,000 shoot interviews, and they've done every podcast that's ever took place, and their story backwards and forwards. But people don't know your story. They don't know Eddie's story and Mr. Tommy. And so we're giving it to them here each week. And I'm excited that everybody's liking it and listening. And I'm glad you're hearing the same.
Oh, yeah. And it's cool, Gene. Like me and you was talking about earlier, we was just going back and forth about different things. And like I kind of told you about, we was talking a little bit about Mid South. So, I mean, like the history of, from my dad, my brother, and myself, when I started, where my brother was at, where my dad was at, the different territories. I think a lot of people like to hear about the territory days and everything, and that's some really cool stuff for us to talk about and get into and everything.
So if you're listening to this, and I opened it up this week, I went on our Facebook page, and I said, hey, if you got any questions about Global, put them in here or email them to us, DougGilbertPodcast@outlook.com. And we've had several people that have sent us some questions. We're going to be talking about some of those questions. So if you're listening to this right now, Doug just mentioned Mid South. If you have questions concerning, Doug's time in Mid South, Eddie, send them that email, DougGilbertPodcast@outlook.com. Put it on the Facebook page. We'll get to it.
And Gene, I say Mid South, or you could say UWF, which it kind of turned. It went from Mid South to UWF before it was bought by Jim Crockett and everything. But during those times, I was there during the Mid South to the UWF times. My brother was there before I was, and up through that time until Crockett bought them out and everything. But yeah, that was a cool time, a little time in history and everything. That there was a lot of good stuff going on and everything there. Also, Gene, like we was talking about, you was talking about the Global. I think I asked you the other day when you were saying to me about people asking about Global and everything. You remember, right? Now, how old would you have been when the Global stuff was on, Gene?
When Global was out, I would have been like right as it was hitting TV. I was probably like 12, 13 years old, somewhere in there.
Well, do you actually remember then coming home from school and it being on every afternoon?
Absolutely. I rushed. If I got off my school bus and hit a dead run to my front door and we didn't hit any traffic with the bus, I would be walking in the door as the theme song was playing. And I was there every day.
Well, I said, now that was kind of cool. You know, there's not very many people that can even say there was their show was on ESPN, much less on every afternoon. That was kind of a really kicker to me. And I always thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that's actually one of the first questions I was going to ask you was, you know, and you being a bit of a sports fan, you know, how big of a deal was that for you to be on wrestling on ESPN? That's pretty awesome.
Oh, you're right. I'm a huge sports fan. You know, I'm crazy about this time of year, football, but I mean, I'm a football, baseball, basketball. I like it all, but I mean, man, it was really cool. And we got to meet a lot of the, guys, like when they would come to Dallas, the commentators and the sports guys that was with ESPN and stuff. That was really cool to me. And I mean, there was a lot of cool guys there, which is a lot of cool sports people in Texas anyway, in Dallas there and everything. We met a lot of them, and that was really cool. It was kind of the same way when we was in Philadelphia, like Ron, Ron Jaworski, wasn't that his name? Went to Philadelphia Eagles quarterback. We met him when we was in Philadelphia, and that was pretty cool and everything. But yeah, I'm big. Like I said, I'm a huge sports fan, and the ESPN deal, I've always thought that was a real cool deal and everything to be on every afternoon. So, and who, Gene, you was on, and this goes away from global, but wasn't it? Who was it? Tully Blanchard's dad. Wasn't they on? And what was that? Something West
Southwest
Texas?
Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, wasn't they actually on there for a minute? And I think
they were on they were on early, and then they eventually switched over to USA Network. They actually preceded WWF in being on the USA Network, and then the AWA made it on to ESPN, and then eventually World Class was on ESPN.
Yeah, I knew the Von Erichs coming there somewhere, and they was on it, but I was, for some reason, I was thinking the first one, wasn't it?
First ones was Joe Blanchard Southwest Championship Wrestling. Absolutely.
And man, you know what? If people didn't see that, you talking about, man, they had during those days when Joe run that, man, there was a ton of talent come through that company. Have you seen some of those old tapes and everything?
Oh, yeah. And we live in such a good time to be like a fan of the old territories, whether you saw it back then or you're a young person. But there's so much of that on YouTube now that you can go back and watch that. As a kid, I had only read about it or heard about it, didn't really get to see it. And then eventually, as I got older, I got into tape trading, and I was able to go back and see a lot of this stuff that I had only heard about. And it was usually grainy and, 10th generation VHS and all this jazz.
And I know I'm not helping here. I'm getting us off track from where you're going. But when you start talking about global, and I said the deal about the TV and everything, then it made me start thinking back about the first things that I'd saw wrestling-wise on ESPN. And that's why I was going to make sure I was right about that, because I know you know all the history of that and everything.
I try to. I'm I'm learning more every day.
Right.
But so just to add a little context for everybody listening to this, because I've come to find out we've got a wide range of fans from, people who have watched it all their lives and are around, our age, and people who are, 30 years younger than I am, who are trying to learn about this stuff. So the Global Wrestling Federation, it kind of came from the end of, USWA sprang from World Class. Jerry Jarrett bought into World Class, and it became USWA, and then eventually they split off.
Right. And Gene, I was also going to tell you this, which you probably overlooked, and you probably knew anyway, but I saw somebody ask you a question earlier about, did Memphis quit taping in Memphis and just when tape in Dallas? No, nobody ever quit taping. I think this was on your USWA, or maybe a question I saw somebody ask you. No, it was nobody ever quit taping in Memphis, even when Jarrett owned the World Class deal, or the little deal they had where he bought it out for a while and everything. They still taped in Memphis every week. But like when we would go to Dallas and do the tapes on Friday night there, they had a country music bus. And like all of us guys that would go, we'd get on that bus, and we'd take that bus back to Memphis and get back to Memphis like at 8 that morning to do TV that morning from Friday night, doing a tape there in Dallas, and get on a country music bus, ride that bus back to Memphis. And we do that, which I don't know if anybody had ever heard that story very much or not.
Yeah, I definitely want to dig into that more in the future, because that's wild to me to be. If anybody owns a map and you know how far it is from Dallas, Texas to Memphis, Tennessee, to imagine these guys wrestling in Dallas on a Friday night, finishing the show, getting on a bus and driving through the night to be back to Memphis in that studio on Saturday morning by 10 a.m. Whew, I bet the time period that you guys are doing that had to just be a whole nother level of.
That was some good times and some funny stories too. I mean, you take that crew and stick them on a bus, and you'd have some guys scratching their head and shaking their head. I laugh. I remember times when right up on the front seat there would be sitting Tojo Yamamoto, and Tojo was a great guy, but we'd all mess with him, and he was always real nice to me and everything, but he was funny, and we had a ton of stories about those trips.
I look forward to getting into those in the future. But global, so most of my knowledge of global, as far as I guess behind the scenes, if you will, comes from Bert Prentice's book. And folks, if you haven't read Bert Prentice, there's a book that Scott Teal put out called Tonight, which is the autobiography of Bert Prentice. And really interesting story, man. Bert was the promoter of promoters, and this is getting a sidetrack a little bit more, but screw it, we're here, man. Tell the folks a little bit about Bert Prentice, about what a promoter he was, and just your experience with him.
Oh man, Bert was to me. I'm trying to think. There's probably another one or two. There's still Herb Simmons out there, and another one or two like Herb. But to me, Bert is like the last of the old Southern promoters that I worked for, that was just right around here between Memphis and Nashville, in Nashville in the area and everything. But Bert was a promoter, and you hear different stories from different people, which that's about all of us. But man, Bert was, anything he ever told me, his word was good with me. I didn't ever question nothing, and anything he ever told me, he kept his word, and he was good for. And I mean, I done a whole lot of business with Bert, and I mean, there was times people would laugh at me. I would go out and work if I wasn't last, next to last, or something, or second to last, like I was at some shows. Maybe they wasn't 50 miles from my house or something. Sometimes I wouldn't even change. I just go to the dressing room, grab my bag, and I'd get ready to walk out, and somebody say, "Well, have you seen Bert yet?" And I said, "No." I said, "I hadn't seen him yet." I said, "Just tell him I'll see him, or to holler at me or something." And what they was talking about was, had I got my money yet? And I said, "What they was telling me, wait and get my money." And I said, "Just tell Bert to call me or something. I'll see him," and everything. But that's the relationship I had with him. And other people would say, "Well, you must be crazy." Every time I would see him the next time or something, he'd hand me my money. I mean, that's the relationship I had with him. And I mean, me and him, there was occasions we didn't totally agree on everything, but everything always worked itself out and everything. But Bert was one, like I said, the old time promoter that he got out, and he got his posters up. He'd have radio, he'd have newspaper, but he'd give you a chance to draw, where a lot of people, where if you was to go somewhere these days or whatever, like me and you're sitting here talking right now. A lot of promoters think, "Oh, that's all the advertisements you need." Well, Gene, like I do. I mean, yeah, we're going to have people to listen. I hope we have a whole lot of people listen. But look, what about in Selmer, Tennessee? You might not have two people listening from there, and right. This might not do any good. But my point is, any person that goes out in town, if there's a poster on the door of the store or the restaurants or whatever, you're giving the guys a chance to draw. If you can hear it on the radio that we're coming, you're giving the guys a chance to draw. If you don't advertise and you don't do your old school promoting like Bert did, you're not giving the guys a chance to draw. And Bert would always give you a chance to draw and give you the opportunity. As long as you worked hard, he'd give you the opportunity to work for him. And like I said, he was a great guy to me. That's my point of view. And I mean, you hear if you ask 10 different guys, you probably get 10 different answers, but Bert was always great to me.
The thing I'd always heard, and then reading his book, that I find amazing about Bert is it seemed like that you could have taken Bert and dropped him out of an airplane and just parachuted him into any town in the United States or beyond. And within 2 weeks of landing, Bert would have TV set up. He'd have a show going. You know what I mean? Like, he set up shows in places that up in Iowa and places that really hadn't had wrestling. And, he would come into town, and within a couple of weeks, he'd have a TV show set up at the TV station. He'd find a ring somewhere. He'd get a roster. People would travel from all over, and he'd have a promotion up and going in no time and making money.
Oh, yeah, he would. And, I laughed at one guy. He called me, and he said, I talked to Bert, and he said, just give you a call, which I told Bert to tell the guy to call me if he wanted. And he was asking about doing business with him. He said, well, Bert told me there was one thing for sure that he lives by. And I said, what's that? And he said, anywhere around here, said, make sure and get along with you and Lawler, and you'll probably do pretty well. I said, well, I appreciate him saying that. I said, but what have you got? And the guy wound up being a good guy, though. But Bert didn't ever give my number to anybody that wasn't too good and everything. And, like I said, anything that Bert ever told me, his word was all I needed, and it was good.
That's awesome. And so I remember reading in Bert's book, he had a lot of insight into global because Joe Pedicino talked to Bert early on and told him, like, hey, I got something going on down in Dallas, and I'm going to want you to be a part of it when it comes together. And so Bert, I think he was in Iowa then, maybe Kansas. But anyway, he was off running a theater and doing a little wrestling on the side. Joe calls him and says, come to Dallas.
Bert was like the Wizard of Oz, wasn't he? He'd be in Kansas, and he'd like blow this way or that way, you could never tell with Bert. But I'm going to tell you, everybody says, like I said, you ask 10 different people, you might have 5 that says something really good, like I did, 5 that don't or something. But man, Bert got me out of a few jams that couldn't hardly anybody else have got me out of, and that's just he knew people in certain places that could really help you and everything, and people wouldn't have thought that, but because most people think Bert, they just think as far as a promoter, they think like, well, he was just an old corny type promoter and everything. But Bert was, I wouldn't say, and you can say a little bit corny, but he was a Southern promoter. He knew what he was doing, and he pushed everything as hard as he could.
Well, and that's what he said that Joe Pedicino was wanting to bring him to Dallas for. That as they got global started, the intention was going to be to get Bert out there booking spot shows all around the area to help get this going, and that didn't come to pass. But we'll get to that as we go. Well,
I was fixing to say, it's hard for me to believe it didn't. If Joe knew Bert that well and everything, I would have figured Bert would have been on the first train out to Texas, and he would have done good because Bert was good around Texas also. He'd made his way, like we was talking about Joe Blanchard earlier. I remember he was in that territory at one time.
Yeah. Well, Bert came there, and his directions were changed. By the time he got to Dallas, now they said, hey, we're not worrying with spot shows right now. Your job, because this is 1991. Wrestling wasn't exactly on fire in 1991, as I'm sure you remember. And so his job was to fill that Sportatorium every Friday night by any means necessary to make sure when these ESPN tapings start that they saw people in those seats. So before I go into any more of like what Bert told us about global in that book, from your perspective, before you went to Texas, what did you know about the Global Wrestling Federation coming in the door?
Man, the thing I knew for sure, because I knew Joe, before this, Joe and Bonnie, I knew both of them very well. And they'd always been really nice to me, and they was great as far as for wrestling business. I don't know if Gene, you remember the show, or I don't know if you would have got, like when I was in Atlanta, I got it, and they had like a show. It was like 10 hours straight of wrestling, but it had a USWA 30 or 45 minute spot on it. But every territory, they had like a 30 or 45 minute spot, but it wound up being like, I don't know, 8 or 10 hours of wrestling. And, but it was, everybody could catch up. If you got that station that they was on, Joe was a big wrestling guy as far as he knew all the players and everything. And Joe had wound up, and what you probably know this, last week you told me who the money guys was, but they wound up being, I think it was like a family or something that had money that put into this to the GWF, and Joe was their guy that I think that they put the money with and wanted him to get it started.
Yeah. So according to Bert, there was originally this Nigerian person who was going to be putting like $25 million into it. And then Joe realizes this guy's not quite straight. He's not legit. Which is ironic because years later you get all these Nigerian princes and emails sending everybody $25 million. But According to him, it was a guy out of Atlanta who owned a huge landscaping business, but his mom is the one that bankrolled the landscaping business to start with, and she was the one that had the bulk of the money, who was behind him, who was behind Joe, who was helping kick off the GWF.
Now that sounds right. That's about the story that I'd heard and everything, and that they put up quite a bit of money and was getting everything started and getting everything rolling and everything. And I mean, by the sounds of it, at the starting of it, by what I heard, everything sounded really good. And I knew they had the deal with ESPN and was, the name of it and everything. And I knew when they'd asked Eddie to start booking it. And I'm not sure, before Eddie was there, Gene, what Bill Eddie was there, was he some kind of, wasn't he like what did Joe call him? Like I don't know.
He was like the booking assistant or something, because that was the thing that was unclear. Because Bert said he was in and out of the office as far as the booking side, but he said that Joe was coming up, like he came up with the Patriot, he came up with ideas, and then Bill Eadie was helping turn those ideas into actual angles, booking it into a wrestling show.
Right. And see, Bill, the deal though, they had an office in Atlanta, and Bill would stay. He would go to that office in Atlanta. Now he would never come to the TV tapings or nothing like that. So, I mean, I can see what you're saying about maybe kind of booking different as far as aspects of talent that Joe come up with, but Bill never come to Dallas for the TV tapings or anything. So, I mean, like I said, I think he was getting paid a couple grand a week or something, and just, going to the office in Atlanta and going back home, but he didn't ever come to the TV tapings like when we did the tapings for ESPN there at the Sportatorium.
Yeah, the story I heard in that book and at other times was that Joe and Bill Eadie worked together in Atlanta in an office.
Right.
And then Joe flew into Dallas on Fridays before the TV taping. And Bert kind of, during his time there in the early goings when Bert was there, he kind of handled things at the Sportatorium day to day. And he was out putting out the flyers, giving out tickets, making sure there was going to be a crowd on Friday night. And then meanwhile, Joe would show up Friday with all the plans that he had built together with him and Bill Eadie, and then they executed it on the show. Now, do you know how we got from I'll actually name this guy because he posted this to Twitter. At Dylan's X profile, asked, who was the booker of GWF before Eddie came in, and was the transition from the previous booker to Eddie a difficult one?
I'm trying to think who the previous booker was. Do you have?
I don't see. I only know of Joe, and then Bill Eadie, and then they said as soon as the money started getting a little iffy, Bill Eadie was out. Like the first time they were like, "Hey, man, we might not have your whole $2,000 this week." Bill Eadie was like, "Well, no, I'm not doing this."
Well, see, I to be honest, I think it just went from, I guess what you're saying, Bill Eadie and Joe. I think it just went from probably when Bill Eadie was out, Joe wanted to have actually a booker, and I think that's when he hired Eddie and everything. Because I mean, like I said, I was there for a good little minute when Bill was still there, and that was kind of a strange thing to me, which I mean, I didn't care and never asking questions about it. But I thought, dang, this guy here, he's supposed to be part of the office, and I don't ever even see him. But I mean, I knew they had an office in Atlanta, and he would go there and they would conduct business there. But I was just on the Dallas end, like I'd either drive or fly from Memphis to Dallas and back and everything. And that was kind of like, when I was there, I'd see it was more as far as the booker was Eddie, and as far as his assistant booker, you'd probably say would have been James Beard. James Beard really helped my brother a lot. And James is a really good guy. I mean, a really smart guy, wrestling business smart guy. Smart guy anyway in life, but he's a good wrestling guy.
And Joe was in Continental when you guys were in Continental and Eddie was in Continental. Joe was there at the time. I'm sure he knew. I mean, you knew him before that, but I know.
Yeah, I did.
He definitely had firsthand experience of Eddie's booking because he was there for the Continental run.
Right, he was there for that, and also I knew him from. You're gonna laugh, but you said something. I was telling you about the history of something. Me and Eddie going over and working for Jerry Blackwood and Tommy Rich right outside of Atlanta at that time. Joe was also, like I said, Joe was a player in those days in the wrestling business because everybody didn't have Joe had syndication hookups, and everybody wasn't sure in those days what to do with what they had syndication, but they knew syndication would be good for something. I mean, if everybody would have used it right and had the money and went in with different people, you know what I'm saying? I mean, like our show here in Memphis, it went to Chicago, went to New York. You know, we never used it or anything as far as, you know, they never run shows off of that syndication, but they had like, I think it was 70 something, which you're the historian. Have you ever looked into that as far as the USWA, the syndication deals like they had?
No, I know.
There was
I know Bill Barron's had a big hand in some of that later on.
Right, he did, but I mean, there was like 60 or 70 different markets that they would send tapes out to. But I'm not talking about little 1,000 people towns. I'm talking about Chicago, New York, Baltimore. I'm talking about places that, you know, would really, which what I'm saying, we'd have had to. But I mean, it was watched a lot too. It wasn't like it was just sent and somebody wasn't watching it. You know, there was watched a lot. That's why I think, dang, man, that would have been, you know, in those days, which I don't think. What I'm saying is Joe was a big power player in that part of the industry that people, and like I said, Joe was always super nice to me. Him and Bonnie both was and everything. And they was real, them and Eddie got along real well.
Well, I think Joe probably understood the power in that syndication.
That's
money to be made in advertising and that, you know, big of a syndication network and
right. And so he was right there in the middle of it in Atlanta. Think how big, I mean, and still wrestling was huge in the days I'm talking about. Like I said, there'd be a down year or a down year or two here or there that it didn't draw as good, but still when you're on TV and you've got people that aren't having to pay, but are sitting home. Like I said, he had a TV show that was on 7, 8, 9 hours. It was that long, just the wrestling from all over the world.
And I'm sure that he made good money off advertising for that. And I'm sure all those promoters were sending their tapes for free just for the promotion of getting seen in the Atlanta market and everywhere that show went. So he had to show that he really wasn't costing him much, but then he was making money off of it. And so this global thing had the potential of doing that on a much larger scale.
And I think so. Like I said, he was right there in Atlanta. So he had all the other territories plus the Atlanta stuff. And I mean, he covered everything. It wasn't, you know, he wasn't against nobody. He wanted everybody to do well. I mean, like I've told you, you know, I want everybody to do well. I might not, some stuff I might agree with more than others, but you know, I'd like for everybody to do good. I mean, we've all got what we'd like and what necessarily we might not like as much. I don't want to say what we don't like, but we've all got things that we like a little more than we like others and everything. But yeah, Joe was just he was a good guy in those days, which he's always been a good guy to me and everything. But he knew the wrestling business and the wrestling industry.
And to prove your point on that, I don't know of any other promotion outside of Global. Joe would promote other wrestling promotions on that show. If a guy left to go to WCW, they would say on the show, oh yeah, he's no longer here. He just went to WCW, or he went to Japan, or he went to wherever.
Exactly. And like what me and you'll get to in a minute with Dale Wilkes. I mean, when I wound up winning the belt from him, he was going to a tour of Japan for like 6 weeks. You know, they'd go 4 to 6 weeks during those days and everything. But I mean, it was one of those deals where it was time for Dale to be gone a little bit and everything. You know, everybody had to work what people don't think about or never thought about in those days. They didn't think about what the territories and the promoters and the bookers had to work around in those days. And knock on wood, I'm glad they did, because it made it better for a lot of us. And we was able to come back and work for them when we got back. And we didn't have to go somewhere else to make more money, because that would, you know, the money that we was making overseas would cover some of that money that you wasn't making for the big boys.
Right. And I'm sure in Joe's mind, that makes you a bigger star when you come back to ESPN to be able to say, oh, this guy's been in Japan, this guy's done this, and making a worldwide reputation, because that was another part of the puzzle here. And Broadcast Bob Anderson is a guy I know, a friend of mine, that has sent in a few different questions. And that was one of his questions, was the fact, you know, the whole global concept in the beginning, you know, they said they had titles and satellite promotions all over the world, and you know, was presenting it as a bigger promotion than what it actually was in the beginning. Right. And another one of his questions that I'll ask you here before we get too far into it: what kind of shape was the Sportatorium in by '92? Didn't they do a lot of
Man, Gene,
grades?
I would like to tell you it was great, and from what I'd heard before, it was in a lot better shape than what it had been in the history before that. But I mean, it was still, man, I thought it was a cool. If you was a wrestling person, I thought it was a cool wrestling atmosphere building and everything, but it wasn't. It sure wasn't no Mid South Coliseum, or it wasn't no Louisville Guards, or what I'm saying. It wasn't a venue that you would just go in and think you had never seen anything like it, because it was more of a. And I don't think, Gene, do you know, did they ever do anything? I mean, I'm sure a time or two, but did they ever do anything else in there other than wrestling?
I mean, I know in the past, like years before this, they had concerts there. I know Elvis had performed there at one point. They had some pretty big concerts and stuff back in the day.
Well, you just went off the rails. I thought you were going to say they had Michael Hayes there, and you said Elvis. So Elvis actually.
No, because Michael Hayes used to like to brag that the Freebirds outdrew Elvis in the Sportatorium, because, you know,
oh my gosh,
claim to fame was Lawler outdrew Elvis in Memphis, and Hayes would go, yeah, but we outdrew him in the Sportatorium.
My gosh. But the cool thing about the Sportatorium, like I said, just walking down from the dressing room down the, the way, going down the walkway there to the ring, just, to me anyway, people thought about the history of wrestling. I always thought that was really cool and everything. But as far as people asked me before about it being that had never been there or anything, or just seen it on TV and everything, I said, was it really nice? And, I'd tell them, yeah, it was okay and everything, but realistically, between all of us and all the wrestling fans that's listening or whatever, it wasn't very nice. I mean, as far as, it was just an older type building, and the benches that had wood, the wood bench seats with a wood back across it. So it wasn't really comfortable either. But it was a cool building during the heyday of wrestling in Dallas that was used. And I mean, they drew thousands and thousands of people to it.
Yeah, you had to love the history of it. One person I heard describe, I wish I could remember who this was, but they said, comparing the GWF days, they said the Sportatorium by that time was a dump. But once Joe Pedicino come in, it was a dump with a fresh coat of paint. Like, they come in,
right? Well, and
it black, and they were calling it the Global Dome, which
the Global Dome. That is what they call it. Which he was just trying to come up with something new and get the old kind of out, but it was still, like I said, it was still the history, the wrestling history of the building was still cool and everything. But like Joe did paint it up, and he made it a lot better. But like I said, people just asked as far as the arena part about it being nice. And I mean, Joe put the, like I'm saying, where if you shoot camera angles and everything behind everybody's black and everything's kind of blacked out, and it looks better and nicer. And now Joe knew all of his, Joe was a TV guy. I mean, he knew TV, which, I mean, I think he knew wrestling well also, but Joe was a business guy. He knew syndication, he knew TV, he knew the wrestling business, which, I mean, I think, Joe during the day, I mean, when he was in Atlanta, I think he hustled with all the syndication and stuff. So, I mean, he knew how to fix something up. And like you said, maybe put up one of my buddies told me the other day, he was remodeling a house. He said, I'm trying to get this big pig finished. I said, you trying to do what? And he said, well, you're putting a fresh coat of paint on this pig to try to get it done. But he's talking about to make it look better, right? And that's what Joe done kind of with the Sportatorium. And I mean, he done a real good job with it. And I think during the time when me and Eddie was there, I think he had good talent and everything. And I mean, I think Eddie produced a good show for him. So, I mean, that was good during that time.
Oh, yeah. If you read down the roster of Global, it's a who's who of professional wrestling, not just like of the Southwest, of wrestling
everywhere.
In general. They brought stars in from all over the place.
Yeah, Eddie had a good crew, which he had the kid. He was there with him. He had Jerry Lynn. I mean, I'm just throwing a couple names out there, but I mean, there was a ton of different guys that, you just wouldn't put together. You wouldn't think of this as being a crew. What I'm saying, if you named all of them, you could look back and see all the different guys. And it was it was sure a mixture. And that's what I always say, you need a mixture. You need something different from opening to the end. If you got a mixture, you're going to hit on somebody's level. They might not like it all, but at least they like something through there.
Now, here's something I'm really curious about, and we mentioned this at the beginning. Global's on ESPN every afternoon for quite a while. Right. How does the tapings work? Like, how often are you having to tape, and how long are these tapings to be able to fill that much time?
Man, we was doing three to four tapings every Friday night. That's
Wow.
as crazy as that sounds. I mean, that's what we was doing, which now Joe did have a good deal like you was talking about. I mean, he would sell the ads on a lot of it. And I mean, Joe
Yeah.
done real well with all that. I don't think people realize how well he done with that part of it and everything. But I mean, still it was every bit. We would start at like, I think 7 and it would be midnight. I mean, and that's too much. And I mean, we was doing it every week, but I mean, and that's what I asked Eddie one time. I said, man, is it not going to burn these people out or what? And he said, Doug, they've done it here forever, which what he was going by was he had to have that many hours of taping to get everything done that he wanted.
Yeah.
And everything. And I thought, geez, it's, because we'd leave there at midnight and I'd get home like at 8 or 9 in the morning, and it was just a crazy when I'd ride back. And a lot of times I'd fly, but a lot of times I'd just ride back with the guys because we had guys coming from Nashville. And I'd say during the night, I'd ask them what they was going to do. Was they going to stay? Or because like they had hotel rooms that they'd get for them. But if they wanted to get home, they'd go ahead and leave after the show. And while they was waiting good and all pumped up and drive on back, a couple of them together. And I'd ride back with them every once in a while. But you're talking about what, you're standing there for, like I said, if you're starting at 7. And the thing about it, we would start before 7 because we would do the pre-tapes and everything that was going to go in the ESPN shows. We would do that before the shows got started. So, everybody would have to get there early and do all of those. And we'd do that for the shows. And you'd have, like I said, the 3 to 4 hours of actual like wrestling and everything. So it was kind of crazy.
Wow. Every Friday night. I was expecting here like twice a month, but to fill that much time, TV time, you would have to tape that frequently.
It was crazy. To me, it was even, it was so crazy at the time because I was used to this territory, the USWA and everything, having like shows every week, but it was just, they had told me that before all that every week they run the sport. I mean, from the Von Erichs to when Jarrett got it to this point, the people that was what they was used to, coming out there every Friday night and watching wrestling. A lot of times every Friday night and Saturday night and watching wrestling.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. So if you're looking to support that next up and coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia.
But there was a lot of talent out there. I mean, that just lived out there. And I mean, the only thing about that, by the time we got there, they had used them so often that the people, every once in a while it's time for a little bit of change and everything. And during that time, it was a little bit time for a change because they'd watched the same thing there for so many years that, they wanted something a little bit fresh. And Joe wanted something a little fresh also. And I think that helped things.
Well, and that makes sense. And like you said, there were these certain guys that you knew in Dallas for years. You know, you were going to see your Tim Brookses and, you know,
Right.
Chris Adams and different people. And now, like you say, all of a sudden you're seeing Jerry Lynn and the Lightning Kid out there. And
Right.
that was unlike anything they had seen down there.
Right. Well, just something different that was entertaining. That was, I mean, like I said, and I love the guys that you just said, but this was a total different ball game that people had never seen. And I mean, it was smaller guys that flew around and everything, but all their stuff looked as real as anybody's in the business. And I mean, the guys was good, and they had psychology and chemistry and with one another. And I mean, like I said, you can look at that whole crew, and I mean, it just goes from A to Z, from one extent to another on what the guys done.
Absolutely. So tell me about, if you know, whose idea was the Dark Patriot, and how do you remember it being pitched to you?
Well, it was pitched to me because I had just come back from a tour of Japan, and I was going to go out there, and actually I was going to do something. I was trying to think which of the guys. Eddie had thought about bringing one of the guys back, and I think it might have been Gary Young or one of those guys which he'd come up here to Tennessee, but he was out in Dallas before and everything. And I was going to do something with him. Well, at that point, when I was in Japan, I come back, and my brother said, "I still want you to come." He said, "But we've got a different idea." And I said, "Okay," because I mean, I knew it would be okay. I said, "All right." And he said, "I want you to talk to me and Joe about it, and tell us what you think." And when I went out there, Dale was out there, and I talked to him some, and he said, and they told me his situation, what was going on with him, and he was going to need, he was going to be gone for, I think it was 6 weeks, but he wanted 2 weeks before that off, so he was going to be gone for 2 months.
Oh, wow.
And they said, we need a heel to do an angle with him, and let's put the North American strap on for 2 or 3 months anyway. And I said, all right. I said, what do y'all want? And they said, well, we got to have something opposite of the Patriot. And we sat there and we talked a little bit. And I said, well, what about if we use I said, call it something just like a heel Patriot or something. I think is what I told my brother. And it wasn't but just 15 or 20 minutes later, I'd walked out of the room. And he said, what about the Dark Patriot? And I said, that sounds as good as anything I can think of. And he said, get you a black outfit, put red stars on it, and get you a hood and put stars on it, red stars. And he said, we'll go with that. And so I got me a red cape and everything. And that's kind of how all that come about. But I mean, just like I said, it was, but it goes back to what put you in that situation. You know, Dale was a great guy, and he was a great champion out there, and he drew him money and everything. And I mean, Dale was a good dude and everything, but the situation of him going to get his money in Japan, it put the company in the situation where they had to react to what he was doing. So that's how it kind of all come about.
Yeah. I mean, they managed to make the Patriot into their biggest star, you know, out there starting out. It was a great character, and, you know, Dale looked like $1 million, and it really worked. But this, I mean, that's actually, the whole thing's pretty genius when you think about it, because like this guy's going away. He's your biggest babyface star. He's going away for 2 months, which is scary for a promoter. But if you take this guy who comes in, he's the Dark Patriot. He's the antithesis of the Patriot. But now every week that the Patriot's not on TV and you're talking about the Dark Patriot, you're reminding the fans every time you see the Dark Patriot, you're still promoting the Patriot, because they know at some point he's going to have to come back seeking revenge. So it's actually, it's a perfect scenario. And
if you remember, Gene, on like the vignettes and promos I'd plug him on every one of those that I did. And the funny thing about that, not that it hurt anything, because it was good. And like you said, it's reminding people of everything that happened. Like we would show it over like every 2 or 3 weeks. And then he was supposed to come back, and we was going to have the big match. Well, I'll be dang if when he was in Japan, he wound up talking with Vince and them, and he wound up having it when he got back, which he was real cool. He told us he would come back and work for his, his time off. But then right after that's when he signed the deal Vince and them. And I was happy for him because I thought I knew he would do real good because, I mean, man, Dale was in great shape. He had the look, like you said, he looked like $1 million. And Dale was one of them really tough guys. I mean, he was All-American, I think, football at South Carolina, wasn't he, wherever he played. But he was one of them real, I mean, people wouldn't want to mess with him. He was a real tough guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's right up Vince's alley, legitimate athlete, big guy, got the ready-made gimmick. I mean, I guess in retrospect, Joe wished he would have, patented that, copyrighted that gimmick some kind of way.
And you know what? You're probably right, but man, Joe was so nice. There's different ones of us. I mean, you can sit here and talk, and you're cool and nice dude, Gene, but there's so many people that would hold stuff against people for going, even though they're going to do better for themselves, but still they'd hold stuff against. Joe was such a nice guy. He was happy if I would have signed with anybody during that time. Me and him would still been friends because he was proud for everybody. He wanted everybody to do good. And his theory, and I think that's right, is if you go ahead and do good, I mean, he'd talk about you on his TV that you'd done good. You was with the WWF or you was with whoever, and you was in Japan doing well, and that you'd done good, and they couldn't wait. If you wanted to come back, they'd take you back in a minute. But he was one of the first guys that I saw, it was really like that.
And that's great. And honestly, that's a bargaining chip for getting new talent in the future, because you sit somebody down and go, hey, we helped build the Patriot. Now look at him. He's on, he's up there. If you come in for us and you work hard and you do, what we need you to do, you potentially could, move on to bigger and better things. Because, I'm sure Joe knew that was the promised land. That's where everybody was wanting to go.
Right. And here, Gene, during that time, how many people was there on? I mean, like I said, that was the only show on ESPN right then that everybody everywhere could cut. Like you said, you was coming in from school, that could come in from school or whatever. And if you really had your heart set on wrestling, you could go right in there and flip it on every evening when you got home. I mean, the strange thing was we thought, I thought it was cool back then, but I thought after it went off, I thought, well, that'll never happen again. But now what do? People turn on, go to their TVs every night. They'll say stuff to me during the day. Well, I'm going to watch this. Do you ever watch this show? And I said, what show are you talking about? Now you'd be talking about what you've got WWE, Monday, then who's Tuesday? AEW is that Wednesday and Friday, but then WWE's got NXT and then another show on Friday. So is there any night now there's not wrestling on if you turned it on, Gene?
On television there's something every night, and then good Lord, if you go to streaming there's 100.
But now think of the days me and you're talking about. Think just being on every day. I mean, I don't think a lot of us look at that even the people that listen to this. I mean, think every day, just every afternoon, and think you producing that to be on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And what was cool though is they might put one on, say, Tuesday and one on Thursday, so it might be our live stuff. I say live, or stuff that was recorded, but the new stuff like on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday or something. It was like they'd give us we could put an old show, say on Tuesday or Thursday or something like that, but it's all the fresh stuff would be like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I think is the way it was.
Right. And you were managed by a guy who at the time was known as the Expert, Bruce Prichard. How was it working with Bruce? I know you guys knew him from the UWF days, so he was a friend already.
Hey,
right?
That dang Bruce was an expert. He's still an expert, ain't he? Hey, Bruce is my partner. I like Bruce. He's always been cool to me. Him and his brother Tom. I mean, me and Tom are really cool and everything. I think you've been around Tom a little bit. Tom's a great guy, but I love Bruce. Bruce was the difference. I was around Tom more and Eddie was around Bruce more and everything. But Bruce was always super cool. I mean, I loved Eddie bringing him in. It was during one of his stints when he was away from Vince there for a minute, but I mean, Bruce has been with Vince, away from Vince, or I should be saying WWE or WWF now. Oh, yeah. But he was with him, he was away from him, he was with him, he was away from him, and he's back with him now, right? But I mean, Bruce is a smart freaking wrestling guy. Tom, his brother, is a freaking smart wrestling guy. And Tom's a great worker, which Bruce was a great worker doing his gimmicks, his managing stuff. And he was a great worker as my manager. I mean, he could talk. I mean, Bruce get heat with anybody talking. I mean, but I love Bruce. I mean, he had the gift of gab, and I mean, he still does. I mean, him and Tom, that family, they grew up there in Houston. It's around Paul Bosch, or I think who they say that was so great and everything. But I mean, they was around at the right time because both of them got in the business, and I mean, they paid their dues, and man, both of them are just great guys.
Yeah, I enjoyed Brother Love and everything as much as anybody, but I was really glad that Bruce got that time in Global for people to see him in a whole different light outside of the WWF umbrella, outside of Brother Love. Because it was really entertaining.
Yeah, I thought that was cool too. And I'd always tell him, just the only thing with Bruce and he always done this karate stuff and everything. And I'd laugh, which he'd get over with me. But I said, you better stay close, don't get so far away from me. And he'd say, what? I said, don't get so far, because they would let the people so close to us at the Sportatorium, and these people take swings at him, and I'd always, make sure didn't nobody get him or anything, but I'd have to tell him every once in a while, stay a little bit closer to me than you are. But Bruce he didn't, he wanted to get heat and everything, and he did. I mean, the people hated him, and I mean, he could talk. I mean, I loved some of his stuff. I loved his promos just like that he would do with me, but I loved his stuff that him and Eddie would go back and forth about, and they had some good promos back and forth issues, which I just stand behind him. But he man, you talking about he could talk. I mean, and he could get heat talking, and I mean, Bruce was just good. And Bruce is really smart. I mean, people that don't know that about him, I think everybody now, wrestling days, he's been in and around the office so much, do know that he's really a smart wrestling business guy.
And he's a guy who took this form of podcasts and reinvented himself, and thought he was forever on the outs, thought he would never be back in WWE, and then built, him and Conrad Thompson built that podcast into just an absolute juggernaut, and eventually got him back in the WWE, and he's a huge part of that up there now. So
and which, I mean, I'm happy for him. I don't know, there's been so many times he's, like I said, he's went and left and went and left and went and left. But here's the thing about it, and people had asked my brother this before, and they said, how'd you go back to you just left WCW and went back, and then left and went back, and how'd you do that? How'd you go? And my brother, I used to laugh at my brother's answer. My brother's answer would be, look, if you got good enough ideas or you can draw money, they will bring you back. And Bruce, his mind was so good and still is so good and everything. I think they would always bring him back. But I think it was cool, like his days when he was gone from there. I think it gave him something to do when Eddie called and asked him to come to Global. And he loved business. And, man, Bruce was just really good. I mean, he was really good at what he done.
And I got to imagine when you're creating, when you're doing booking for a show that's out every day, having another creative mind like Bruce to bounce ideas off of probably was really helpful.
Oh, it was. And I mean, I'd hear Eddie tell him, look, man, go home and think about this. And Eddie be thinking about 4 or 5 different things but he'd have a direction, but not exactly what he wanted to do. And Eddie'd tell him, go home and think about this, and I'll call you in a couple of days and we'll figure something out on some of it. But yeah, Bruce was a great guy for that and everything. Like I said, I think he really helped Eddie a whole lot.
So I've got a list of names here compiled from a few different people, of just different people who worked in Global. And I will kind of run down that list and let you just kind of give a quick thought on them. But before we get to that, we have a fan question this week from Mike Needham via email, who asked, can you please tell the real version of the Jeff Gaylord story that happened in Global?
Well, I figured you was just probably going to ask me about him, but the real story was, I was working with my brother one night, and it was during that time you're talking about that Bruce was there. And I come back in from the ring, and like always, after I'd worked with my brother, I was so blowed up, and you was under a mask too, and it was usually hot in the Sportatorium, and you'd have to go, we'd go 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. And we went that, and every time I'd walk back up the ramp, and like me and Bruce get to the back, I'd either be undoing my hood or something, and we'd go in our dressing room. If you walked in there, was all the way over, like you go to the right and then back to the right, and you'd be in a little room by yourself. Well, I done that, and I was getting my stuff off, and I took a drink. Somebody handed me like a Coke or something, like in a bottle, and I took a drink of it, and all of a sudden I heard my brother's voice, and then I heard like a calamity outside the door, say like 15 foot from the door where I had walked in. And so I jumped up. When I jumped up and I walked out the door, and I looked, and Jeff Gaylord my brother was walking towards me, but Jeff, from where he was just coming back to the ring, and Jeff Gaylord was behind him swinging at him. And I think he hit my brother once, and he swung one time, and his arm went beside of him. And by that time I'd got there, and I pulled my brother, like he was facing me. It had been his left shoulder. I pulled his left shoulder to the side, and I hit Gaylord in the eye with the bottle. And it busted his eye, but then he swung at me. I ducked. I hit him. He swung again. I ducked. I hit him again. The third time I raised up to him. You got to realize this dude was freaking 300 pounds, jacked out of his head on steroids and doing cocaine and everything. So it wasn't, I guess I was lucky that I done as good as I did. But then after that sequence that I just told you there, then I looked, and he turned and he took off running, but now he was bleeding down his ае from where, I ain't saying it was the strength of my punch, but it's probably that bottle that I hit him with in the eye. But I mean, it was just in my hand from me drinking.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he takes off running. So as he takes off running, I start running too. Well, he runs out the door of the Sportatorium and jumps in a car. And right as I'm about to go out the door, like I open the door, but then it's just as the show's getting over, because me and my brother was last.
Yeah.
He jumps in the car. So I stop. I think, shit, I can't walk out there with, I'm the Dark Patriot, and it's me with all my stuff on except the hood I pulled off. So right. I stop right there, and he jumps in the car and takes out. And I asked some of the guys from Dallas there, I said, what the F is going on? And come to find out, I forget, Gene, who it was, but supposedly one of the guys down there somewhere had paid him supposedly $1,000 to try to get it, I guess, to like beat Eddie up or try to get him not to come back. And then the story come out that it was supposedly because he wasn't using the guys from Dallas, some of them, but I can't even, there's 2 or 3 names that I heard, but I can't remember exactly if you've heard anything, if you said the name, I'm sure I would remember, but I was trying to think, but I remember he got out of prison, and his story was a guy called and said this to me, and I said, oh man, that's bullshit, that somebody had paid him, and he told Eddie, and it was a big work, and he gave Eddie half the $1,000. Now that's bullshit. Eddie wasn't even ever in no kind of dealings or friends with Jeff Gaylord, but he had his issues, and I'm not sure what, but it was just that was one of those deals like, like Wild Wild West wrestling. I mean, you're not sure what, and I was thinking, what kind of crap is this? I've seen a lot of different stuff, but not the guys try to jump on the booker.
Yeah, I saw a clip of that where Gaylord was trying to sell that it was a work, and I was like, no, I've heard that story from too many sources to know that. As I remember the first time I ever heard it, and somebody's like, yeah, from what I heard, Gaylord jumped Eddie from behind. Doug come in, saw Gaylord on Eddie, come through, busted the bottle on him. I'm like, that checks out. I can totally see Doug doing that. If somebody's on his brother, he's going to. And
that's what the following night they was at a show, like, they said like a spot show, which wasn't hardly any of them on RTV at that time, but, they was just at a different little town there. One of the guys walked in. For some reason, it seems like I remember it was being Billy Travis or somebody like them. Walked in, and Gaylord was there and dressed, and his eye was all kind of messed up. And they said, what happened to your eye, Jeff? And they said, you kind of turned away from him and everything. We say all knew what had happened and everything. But I was thinking, shit, guys, leave him alone. I thought I'll have to fight him again next week. But I mean, I don't care. That's what I've done if I had to. But like I said, that was some different. And, I tried to think about it like maybe the way some of them did. And that's what I told Eddie. I said, maybe they think since you're not using them, in which, he would throw 1 or 2 of them in here or there. But here's the thing. You could have used all of them, but didn't any of them want to do business as far as putting people over on. And it didn't hurt. If you look at the crew that Eddie had in there, we all put each other over. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't a not as far as me, I mean, even when Dale was leaving, I beat Dale. I wound up being the North American champion. Well, I was a champion till I dropped the belt, but I still put guys over during that time. And all the rest of the guys, the guys that was Eddie's guys, they always put everybody over. It wasn't a thing about not putting people over, but I guess their logic was they was in Dallas at the time and they lived there and they didn't want to, which that's not good logic. I'm saying, I guess I could understand it. It wasn't business logic. It wasn't, but I guess they thought, well, the rest of these guys are going to leave and if they beat us and we're not going to mean anything, but that's not the wrestling business.
Well, two things about that. One, you're rebuilding Dallas because, you know, it was dead. And so you needed new faces in there to do that. And if you were going to use guys who had been around, you're going to need to beat them to help get these new guys over. But the other thing, too, is you guys were looking bigger than – you guys weren't looking at, okay, this is a weekly show in Dallas. This is a show on national television on ESPN.
Right. And Eddie would read the real good deal that I thought Eddie did with everybody was he would repackage people. I mean, repackage them, rename them, put them in a different group. I mean, get another run out of them. I mean, as far as my brother loved Pez Wadley. Anywhere he went, he would carry Pez if Pez wanted a job and everything. But there were certain guys. And whoever was there, he would, if they could work, he would repackage them. I mean, change their name, do something with them. And a lot of time they'd just get heat with people, and they would draw money. I mean, it's just. It's just having the brain to put people in the right situations to make the most out of their ability.
I remember when he made Pez Willie Be Hurt, and I was seeing the ads for Willie Be Hurt, and I'm like, I've never heard of Willie Be Hurt. And then when he came on TV, I was like, oh, that's Pez.
Pez Wadley. Well, and I love that because I got to work with Pez a bunch when he was Willie Be Hurt. And I love Pez. Yeah. I mean, like I said, Pez was my first manager. I mean, that was a cool deal, which I loved Pez. Pez was one of them guys that could freaking tie people up in a knot. I mean, that was Pez. Pez was cool and everything. But I mean, there's so many different guys like that in the different territories that, you might not have thought you knew when you just heard the odd or different names. But then when they come out, it'd be somebody that, the face you might recognize the face, but it'd be somebody that had been someone else before.
So we're getting low on time, so we're going to run through these names real quick. Because if you have a fun story about them or just the first thing that kind of pops in your head, Hollywood John Tatum.
Man, John was a freaking I always got along real well with John. John was cool. To me, John was a entertainer and John was a fun. John would have like we all should be. Shouldn't none of us worry, right? I mean, it don't do any good to worry about anything. But John was one of them guys. I don't think he ever worried about much. Now, he might have got into a lot of stuff maybe shouldn't have at different times. But John was always really cool to me, and everything. It was just if you wanted to have a good time and you was out and about, and John was by himself, man, he was a blast. And man, John could freaking work. I mean, if you look at any of his stuff, he could freaking work. I mean, and he was. They did an angle down here in Memphis one time with my brother and Tony Anthony and John, and it was one of them times I was in Japan, and the first couple of weeks they was in 6-man tags, and they was going to be in one the third week. Well, the first 2 weeks, John come down from Texas, and man, they was doing good, drawing good money, and I mean. Eddie had heat, Tony Anthony did, John did, and like the third week, John called and said, "I can't come back." Something just he was going to be off for a couple of weeks or something. But man, when he was here and he wanted to do business and everything, man, he could freaking, like I said, he could work and get heat, and I mean, he had that look, and I mean, he could sure talk. I mean, but I like John. Everybody's got their own John stories, but man, he was always cool to me, and I was a younger fella back then and everything, and he was always real nice to me.
Awesome. What about, and this is a guy you worked with quite a bit. I know Eddie worked with him quite a bit. Terry Garvin.
Man, everybody had their own stories, like I said, they do about all of us, but Terry was always, I worked with him on those local TVs probably half a dozen times and everything, but I always got along good with him. I heard different people had their opinions about him here, which when he was here, he was more of a talker than a worker. And in Dallas, Eddie used him more as a wrestler than a talker and everything. But man, I thought he could hold his own. And I mean, he was always nice to me, and we got along real well and everything. But I mean, I always thought he was a great guy.
Is that one of the guys that Eddie kind of recreated? Because, before that, he had always done kind of the Jimmy Garvin. He was Terry the Beauty, and he had tagged with the Beast. And so then in Global, he cuts his hair. He gets a little more of an edge to him. We drop the Beauty. He's working as a babyface. Was that Eddie booking him that way?
That was Eddie's doing. And Eddie was trying to change him as he went just a little bit more all the time. And I think they got to a good point. But I mean, like I said, the point I was talking about was like when you was talking about he worked a little bit, but he was more of a manager with the Beast guy, wasn't he, and everything. But man, Terry could work, and the people would get behind him at Dallas and everything. And now I think
another guy.
Wasn't Terry originally, Gene, when he originally from Kentucky?
I believe so. That sounds right. Okay. I think he eventually moved down to Texas. I know eventually in Global they got away from the Garvin name altogether. I think he started calling himself Terry Sims, which I think was his actual shoot.
That's name. What I think Eddie wanted him to do that, just to get him back. That was his actual real name. Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I always got along with him well. Like I said, I worked with him half a dozen times. And I mean, he could hold his own. And I mean, whatever for business-wise that Eddie needed him to do, he was always good. And always
a hell of a lot like Jimmy Garvin for sure, but
right. And
name Terry Garvin was questionable because of the guy from WWF.
Exactly, and that's what I think Eddie was trying to get away from. But he'd show up. He was reliable. He was always, I mean, whatever business wise you needed him to do, he was there and he would do it. And I mean, he was always a good guy.
Now I know you worked some several matches with Gary Young. You mentioned him earlier.
Oh yeah, he's another good guy. Which Gary was another one of them guys. If you look at him on TV, he didn't look. I mean, it just looked like he was in good shape, and Gary was. He's in great shape, and as far as his endurance, as far as wind, as far as working out and everything. But Gary was a big guy. He was just long. Like I mean, his arms was long, and he was just. I mean, he was one of those guys that got into business. I mean, like I was trying to think, he was in where he worked for the Funks. I think my dad went out there like in 76 or 7 or something. And Gary was just starting out there about then and everything. And, I'd heard stories that he'd tell me about being out there when my dad started and everything. But I always liked Gary was one of them solid workers that, I mean, anything he done looked good. And I mean, his stuff, everything was believable. And I mean, he was Eddie was once started calling Gorgeous Gary Young, got him to get the robes and everything. That was in Mid South when Eddie started that with him.
And I guess a lot of people know him for teaming with Mick Foley in Memphis as Cactus Jack, and eventually out in Texas as well.
That's right.
Speaking of Texas, we can't talk about Texas without mentioning these couple of guys real quick. And I don't know how much they were around at the same time you were. Black Bart.
Black Bart I was around Black Bart, not so much in Texas, but when he was here in Tennessee and in Atlanta, I was around him a ton, and I loved Bart. I talked to him. I don't think I've talked to him this year, but I try to make sure I talk to him a couple times a year and everything. And I'll call him and we'll talk for 20 minutes or something. But I always, when he lived here in Nashville and everything, I'd ride. They'd either ride with me or I'd ride with them almost every day. Himself and Tony Anthony, they was a tag team for a while here in the USWA and everything. But I love both them guys. That's two hard workers and two guys. I say big guys. Well, I don't guess I should say big guys by what we look at today as big guys, but say guys say 6 foot, 6'1" or something. That both of them was 260, 270, 280, however, whatever Bart was. But Bart was just one of those believable guys. And I mean, everything I ever seen him do looked good.
And last name, Scott Levy. I think out there he was Scott Anthony, and of course Scotty the Body, and eventually Raven.
I was going to say he went through more names than me and a couple other guys hasn't he? But anyway, I like Scotty was always nice, and he's just for guys that didn't know it was him. If they looked at some of the different characters, they'd say, "Man, this can't be the same guy." But I mean, he started out as the young, handsome baby faced. He went through that I mean, they went through about 4 or 5 gimmicks. What was the one WWF had like a polo player?
Johnny Polo.
Johnny Polo. That's one you didn't say. But I was trying to think. There's a couple other ones I don't think you said, but I laughed but he was always nice. Like we'd rent when he was here in this territory, we would rent. Like I said, we was young fellas. We'd rent convertibles and everything else. Me and him and Brian, and we'd drive them from Memphis to Louisville. By the time we got to Louisville, we'd put the top back up and say, geez, what did we get these for? But just having fun. And like I said, we was young and everything, but he was always cool and everything. I mean, and all of the different characters. Now, a little later on, he changed a little bit in that Raven deal and everything. But I mean, he was always still nice to me and everything. But that was the only one I think he kind of changed just a little bit. But man, he's always been super nice to me.
On the USWA podcast, the episode we just watched, he and Brian, he was Scotty Flamingo at that point.
Okay.
He and Brian had just won the USWA tag titles from the Moondogs, and it was a short-lived tag team, but me and Josh and Richard on the show have really been enjoying those guys together so far.
Well, that would have had to been a short-lived tag team because hell, you'd had 2 microphones for both of them if they was out there, and they'd both been talking over each other.
Oh yeah, it's been a lot of fun watching that. But
the thing about it, both of them could sure talk. So I mean, that would have been good also.
I mean, that's what we were talking about. The one we recorded earlier today is like such heat because they had just won the tag titles. They come out singing "We Are the Champions." Right. Brian clearly didn't know the words. He got lost after the chorus, and Scotty's still trying to sing it.
That's and stuff like that's what's so cool, and that's what I'm saying. But both of them could talk. Like I was saying, we go back global with Bruce Prichard. You know, the Dark Patriot wasn't like I listened to something the other day. Somebody sent me a couple of interviews before Bruce got there where I was talking. It was so much better with me not talking and Bruce talking. Like I said, Bruce was so good at doing what he done and everything.
Yeah. I thought that was a great pairing, him coming in to manage the Dark Patriot. So before we wrap this one up, I guess, how did the global run come to an end for you and Eddie?
It come to an end. I was trying to think the last TV I went to, I was going to go back to Japan for 2 weeks. And I knew they were saying they was a little hesitant about what direction they was going in because supposedly they had another money person that was coming in. And I think Eddie said Joe had told him that said they liked the ESPN liked the TV because the ratings was good on it and everything. And Joe was going to have to see what going forward that whoever was putting the money in, what direction that they was going to go in, which Eddie told him it didn't. It was cool to him, whatever they done. So for that 2-week period, I was in Japan. I think I went that time for like 2 weeks. And I come back. When I come back, Eddie said, they're fixing to go a different direction. I said, they are. And he said, yeah. And I thought, well, that's cool, or it's okay, or it wasn't to me a make me or break me deals. Like you said, I mean, the what was cool about working for them was, I mean, I love the TV being on it and everybody getting to see it and everything. But the cool thing about working for them, you could do your other stuff if you needed to go. If I needed to go to Japan or if I needed to go up north for Friday or Saturday night and miss a taping or something. I mean, that's one thing. I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to put my brother in the spot because he had put me in such a good spot there. But they was cool with that though, where a lot of people wouldn't have been. So that's what I always thought was great with that. But the good thing about all of it, me and my brothers we stayed friends with Joe, and like I said, Joe's a good dude and everything. And I had a blast while we was at Global, and but I think it was just at that point when it was time just for a different direction. I think if Joe would have had the money that he thought he was going to have, or if he'd had a tenth of the money that he thought he was going to have, I think Eddie would have still been there and been his guy and his booker as long as he had it.
Well, things got so sideways with the money, if my understanding is right, that even Joe went away not very long after you guys did. Even he got out of there because it just wasn't what he started.
I think he stayed a couple of weeks, didn't he?
Yeah.
I mean,
not there much longer at all.
He wasn't there long, and then it wound up going. But then after Global went away, but didn't it go back to the Von Erichs again, Gene? Do you know? Or do you remember?
Eventually, they brought the Von Erichs in. They never owned it. I know there's a notorious story, and I know Sid could speak on this because he was involved. Eventually, when Kerry died,
he went back. He
they
told
did a
memorial show and Sid
benefit.
And supposedly.
Sid went for free, and the Von Erichs held him up for money. Is that true?
Kevin did, yeah. And I asked him, he was telling me about this on a trip, and I said, what? He said, I went for nothing. I think he said he got Booker T maybe to go for nothing, and maybe that Stevie Ray, I think that's when both of them was still together. I think he got both of them to go for nothing, which Sid did himself, got them to go because he said the money was going to Kerry's kids, I think is what the deal was. But then they all got there, and they said and it was good and everything. They was waiting on Kevin, this is a story I heard, that they was waiting on Kevin, and then they called him, and he said, I want such and such grand, or I'm not coming. And I thought, well, like I said, that's the story that I had got, and I forgot about that till you started saying that.
I've heard it from multiple sources, and
I thought,
got to be some truth to it.
Well, yeah, I think
that's sad.
I don't want to say I'm 100% sure it is, but it's hard for you saying that than me to remember what Sid's story was about, because I wouldn't even knew anything about it, Gene, if it wasn't for being told.
Right.
And everything. But listen, hey, I hope we've covered a lot of stuff, and I hope everybody likes listening. And Gene, do we have a question or two from some of the people, or have you done asked for those?
I asked you one about Jeff Gaylord, but let's hit at least one more here. Don Depinet from Facebook, who's a really good poster over on the Facebook page and shares and likes a lot of stuff over there, said he'd like to hear a little bit about your time in IWA Mid South in the 90s, which I guess that'd be Ian Rotten's promotion over in Kentucky.
That would be it. You know, when USWA shut down, you're going to laugh about this. On Tuesday night, I wrestled at the Louisville Gardens. Well, their shows was on Thursday night. They had a building. What it was, you remember the old Walmart buildings, like when the Walmarts changed into the newer buildings, most of them just left their old building and built a bigger, newer building. Well, I was trying to think of the road that building was on. But I went over there, like I said, I wrestled at Louisville on Tuesday night. Well, that's when the territory had been sold, to Larry Bartram or Burton or whatever, and the guy from Cleveland. And so at that Tuesday night show, I plugged the Thursday night show. Somebody said, I went to the back and they said, I can't believe you did that. I said, well, what can't you believe? I'm going to be over there Thursday night. And they said, okay. And that's when the territory was actually closed, when they'd, done away with the release, like from the Louisville Gardens and everything. So I was just plugging stuff that, I was going to be on that I'd booked myself on. But some people said, I can't believe you done that. I thought, well, why not? Wouldn't you? I wanted it to draw. I wanted to at least let the people know. But the thing about it, what some people said was, all you're doing is you're giving them credit from our guys to their guys. And I thought, well, I hope something rubs off a little bit, because I'd like to still be able to make a living everywhere I go and everything. But man, I worked with so many different guys, and he'd bring in guys like, they wound up for one of the shows, brought in Funk, me against Funk, called it whoever won it was the King of Louisville or something, which is the only thing, you'd heard it a million times in Memphis and doing that because we'd done TV, but in Louisville, you didn't hear it so much. But I worked with Funk for him. I worked with Ian. I worked with anybody that kind of was friends with him. I worked with them during those days. And that's when I was IWA champion as far as the title from Japan that I would bring back and forth. So I'd defend it every once in a while, get some of those guys and everything, but it was cool. And then he had the IWA, his heavyweight title, and I had it for a little bit here and there. But I mean, I just work against, and their guys was more that ECW style, or they would have any kind of glass and any kind of, just, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but they do the bulb stuff, and every once in a while they do a tad of it to me, but not too much. But like a lot of his guys wasn't that big of fans of mine, because I would go out there and wrestle. I mean, just, we do like stuff like we would do, like Texas Death stuff and everything, but like our old style, not like the bulb and windows and all that. But they do a lot of that. And there was a lot of them that was good workers that would do that. And I said, man, you don't really have to do that. Like, I'd get them out there with me and just get them to do our style. And I'd show them, because I'd be a heel over there, and I'd say, look, all it's going to take is me getting you over a little bit and you'll be fine. I said, just listen, it's not hard. And there was 3 or 4 of them that was really good guys and everything. And I got along with a bunch of them over there, and I had great times over there. And I mean, hell, he drew a lot of money over there in Louisville.
He was around for a long time. He held in there.
Yeah, he sure did. I mean, and there you go again. Here's another guy that you'll hear if you ask 9 other guys, no telling what kind of stories you get, but knock on wood, the majority of the time, whatever he told me, it was pretty much the truth. So that's what I got to go with. One time he booked me on like 4 shows, and it was in a row, and I knew it was he had so much talent on him. He had like Sabu, 3 or 4 other ECW guys, myself, and I just thought this can't turn out good. It was like at his show in Louisville, which I knew that wouldn't do good, but then these spot shows off of that, I knew they wouldn't do good. So I wound up I did the main show. Then I went on back home, and somebody told me, said, he said you was a asshole for not coming. I thought, shoot, all I've done was done him a favor. I said, saved him freaking $1,000 more having to pay me. And but anyway, on one of I laughed one time on one of his, he'd sell his shows, make video and sell them. But on one thing, somebody sent me a clip of one that said, it was me working with somebody, and he said, yeah, that Doug Gilbert can be an asshole at times. But it was after that deal where I didn't go, and I thought, well, at least he got to say what he wanted to. But no, he was always all right with me. I mean, I didn't have no problems with whatever he said.
Well, all right, man. Episode number 3 was in the books. We learned a lot about Global tonight, and I enjoyed it. And next week, we're going to be talking about some Mid-South UWF.
Hey, yeah, no, that's some cool stuff there. And, man, I want to tell everybody thanks for listening and everything. But, yeah, we're going to be talking about, me and Gene was talking about it earlier, talking about some Mid-South stuff. There's some great stories from that, UWF, Mid-South days, man. There's great stories, great talent. But, hey, thanks, everybody, for listening. And like I said, peace. Everybody be cool.
Hey, folks, before we get out of here, I just want to take a moment to remind you to check out DOUGGilbertPodcast.com. There you can find links to all things related to this podcast and to Doug himself. There are links to the Dangerous Conversation Facebook page, where we post all sorts of great content regularly involving the Gilbert family. There's the Dangerous Conversations X/Twitter that we have. Plus, there's a link to the Dangerous Doug Gilbert Facebook and X pages, where you can keep up with everything Doug has coming up, like shows, signings, conventions, you name it, and it's all going to be posted right there by Doug on his social media. He appreciates the support, and if you really want to show support, check out the Gilbert Family Pro Wrestling Tees store, featuring a tremendous array of T-shirts featuring Doug, Eddie, and their father, Tommy Gilbert. And if you've enjoyed listening to this show, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on whatever your platform of choice is. It really helps us out, and it helps us build the podcast for the future. And if you want to see a plethora of matches, promos, and angles involving Doug and Eddie and Tommy, you can check out the Gilbert Family playlists on our YouTube channel over at youtube.com/@RetroWrestlingArchive. But that link is available at DOUGGilbertPodcast.com. Also, don't forget, you can find all things related to my popular retro wrestling review podcast over at USWApodcast.com. And last but certainly not least, we are proud to be a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Go on over to WrestleCopia.com and check out all of the great wrestling-related podcasts and content that our friend Ray Russell provides for you over there. You'll certainly be glad that you did.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/WrestlePod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, wherever you go, whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.